They also fudge the statistics quite a bit. Like in the United States, if you're free of cancer for 5 years, they consider that a cure. In some other countries, it's 10 years. But then you don't realize really. I mean, if you have someone who in year 6 gets cancer again, they count that as a new recurrence when it could be the old one returning. But the statistics look good, if you just say after 5 years cancer-free, you're cured. You have a huge industry, and they make billions. And why in the world would they want to change things and actually cure cancer when they make so much money off cancer? It has now become the #1 killer, passing heart disease, statistically. And it's going to get worse and worse. A lot of cancer, of course, is caused by a virus, various viruses. And they don't want people knowing that. How would you like to take care of somebody that you're knowing that 20 years from now you may get cancer because you took care of someone whose cancer was caused by a virus that lays latent in your system? And to show that viruses can lay latent in your system, a lot of people who have had chicken pox, when they get much older, they end up getting, as you know, shingles. And that's just a recurrence of chicken pox in a different form later, and then things laid latent in your system for 20, 30, maybe 40 years.
It's incredible the research and stuff that they have done with like biological weapons and such things. It's just incredible. I mean, and
you'll never know the extent of this course, And
if we know about it, that means that's the only the small part, It's what we don't know.
Then you have Richard Nixon. He knows what's going on. He knew about all this, and he declares a war on cancer and collects all this stuff over at Fort Detrick. Every single thing that was being done to cure cancer ended at Fort Detrick, and then you never hear about it again.
And look at the anthrax. You get the guy, some crazy lone nut. Here we go with the lone nut thing again. And it's
very convenient.
It's always the same thing. And his family and friends have come out and said, no, you're demonizing him and making him out to be a bad guy. And, it's the same. It's like we were talking earlier. It's the same template. They don't change. They have this playbook.
They're not particularly bright, as I think we've mentioned before. They're simply average intelligence. Those who really understand what's really going on. It's almost laughable to see how the average American person, unfortunately, is kept unaware of most of the evils that are being done. It's destroying our country. It's breaking my heart to see what America has become. We don't have job security. We have a lot of homeless. We have people. The country's going backwards, and because of greed, corruption, and evil, and people being taught to only care for themselves. We've got to care for each other. We've got to care for each other, and we've got to get our standards back.
Well, see, that segues right back into my next question here, which or not so much a question, but Lee was not this monster that they made him out to be. And it's important that the listeners get to hear the human side of him. Is there anything specific or special that you want to share with the listening audience?
Of course. For example, if you look at the Robert Groden, who's a fine man, look at his collection, The Search for Lee Harvey Oswald, you look at those pictures, and every one of Lee is either with someone or, it may be a separate picture. If you cut out all those arrest photos, a lot of them, by the way, have been apparently altered. You see smirks that he never had in real life. I saw that they show him. But I look, and I said, look, to Dr. Howard Platzman, look, he's smiling in almost every photo. He's always with people. People have their arms around him. He's got his arms around them. This is the lone nut who's supposed to be like, antisocial and so on. It's a lie. It's an absolute lie. You can see it in Groden's book easily. As for who Lee really was, he was an ordinary human being as far as what he was doing, but he was deeply impressed by Herbert Philbrick of I Led Three Lives, who posed as a communist for the FBI. He infiltrated a couple of communist cells, and they made picture, films about it that were on television, a television series. Lee saw those when he was 12 and 13. I believe he's 13 years old in New York. And he told me he got on his knees and started to cry. And he said, I just want to help my country. I want to be like him. He absolutely adored Herbert Philbrick. So this is the young man who is supposed to be communist, and they always say things like communist. He never actually even joined the Communist Party when he was even in the USSR. He did not do it. In this interactive timeline, which is a gross caricature, actually, of who Lee Harvey Oswald really was, that's online, there are many things missing. For example, they said that when Lee was got himself bought a rifle, bought a gun, I should say, and joined his this group. Let's see, where was he? He was trying to think where that was. Anyway, this was a gun club, and Lee was invited to come out and shoot. He couldn't shoot a thing. I mean, he was so bad they shot a rabbit for him so he'd have something to bring home. But this is a sharpshooter supposed to have killed Kennedy. By the way, killed Kennedy with no motive, says he didn't do it, passed a voice stress analysis test that says he didn't do it. By the way, also these people will bring up the voice stress analysis test and say, but on the part where it says I don't know anything, he didn't pass that. Well, of course, because he knew that the assassination was going to happen. He did everything in his power to stop it. Lee cared about his country, and he posed as someone who, was an ordinary person to get into the USSR to report back to the United States, and he did so. He had information that he gave back, which is never mentioned. You don't see a thing in this interactive timeline of the life of Lee Harvey Oswald, for example, that he actually interviewed Gary Powers over in the USSR, and that he gave information, threatened to give information, that to the extent that about the U-2 that they had to change all the codes. So he had a cryptic clearance. They don't mention that either. He had a higher security clearance than his commanding officer did. None of that comes out,
Yeah, they never talk. They never really talk about the facts behind, Lee and the stuff that is the truth. The only thing they ever put out is that he's some, little skinny, lone nut type guy. Yeah, and if you look at his background, I had heard the whole, Lee Oswald was a crappy Marine. He was this and that and everything else that they put out. And when I actually looked into it, it's quite the opposite. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Judyth. Go right ahead.
Oh, no, I appreciate hearing your input. You're a young person. You've got to keep the truth going, and thank God for you. I'll tell you that right now. If anyone who had actually known Lee got to know him, when he was arrested, what does he have on his hand? He has a Marine ring on his hand, okay? They take that off right away, and in the Dallas police record, they don't mention it as a ring. They say silver Marine. They don't mention the Marine, that it's a R-I-N-G ring, okay? That only comes out when the FBI makes the list again, and then it says Marine ring, okay? Now, what is the Marine ring about? It says on it, the Marine motto is always faithful. He had a problem when he was arrested. If he had said who he was, his contacts, he had told me this long ago, there are people that were other spies that were in the USSR, okay? And he was in contact with some of them. Had he said that he had been a spy or working with the CIA or FBI, those people would have died. His courage goes further than a lot of people realize. He never felt sorry for himself. When they said, how'd you get hurt like that? Because they saw his black eye, and he said, a policeman hit me. The fact is he was beat up by several policemen at the same time, including being shoved in the back with a gun in his back. He was punched in the stomach by McDonald, who arrested him. And by the way, McDonald, you can find where he actually says that he approached, when he was in the theater, he comes to Lee Oswald, and McDonald, is carrying his revolver in his hand, He's got it drawn. Now, how can he have this revolver drawn, held in his right hand, and when he gets to Lee Oswald, somehow That revolver vanishes, and Lee Oswald, he says he's reaching to Oswald's waist there to get the gun. Lee Oswald did nothing until he reached to the waist. I believe that what he tried to do is plant this gun on Lee Oswald. What did he do? Did he go and put his revolver back in his holster and then go to Lee and struggle with him to get the gun that Lee pulled, they say, out of his... You see what I'm saying? And you have all these eyewitnesses say that Lee pulled it up in the air, but I think that thing was planted. Lee pulled it out of his, out away from him, and that's when he defended himself because he didn't want to have that thing planted on him.
Well, I think that they were supposed to take him out in the movie theater. I don't think he was supposed to make it out of that theater alive. Jack Ruby shooting him in the police station 3 days later or 2 days later was damage control. I don't think Oswald was supposed to make it out of the movie theater alive, and I think however they did it, I think Lee figured out what was up, and I think he was able to at least somewhat defend himself to not get shot somehow, and then. He was very wise. He cried out, police brutality, I'm not resisting arrest, and so on and so forth. Well, see, that's probably what they're shooting. You can't shoot somebody when they're saying that, Well, nowadays, Judyth, they would just do it anyway. But at least back then, the cops realized that they couldn't do it. So. And here you have Lee is in the theater. He's been seen buying popcorn at the time that Tippett's supposed to be shot. Okay, then you have a person who is pretending to be Lee Oswald running into the theater at the proper time without paying, which of course brings everybody in. And then you find out somebody's being removed through the back door by the police. That's seen by a witness. It looks like Lee Oswald, but it wasn't. It's an imposter. But Lee is moving from person to person. He sits next to at least 6 people in that theater. Why would he do that? Well, he told me that when he was in the USSR at Minsk, that he had to move to a certain seat in the theater there, and he picked up a message, a contact message that was taped under the seat. So my belief is that he thought he was supposed to sit next to contact. None of them, well, that was enough to keep him going there and in the theater until, of course, they could catch him. It's very sad. And then, of course, they beat the crap out of him in the police station, didn't give him any, didn't afford him any legal representation whatsoever. I mean, he even said so himself when he walked out and he had spoken to the news people. Oh, yeah. I mean, unbelievable. Can you imagine? And they said, he didn't want anybody. Come on. He asked for it right on air. Yeah, of course he did. But they actually are on record saying that when he was arraigned for murders that he didn't want a lawyer. Of course, we only have their word to prove for it. And by the way, half the things they say Lee said when he was under arrest are reported by the police. We can't trust what they said. Did you know, many people do not know this, you know how these lineups were? This is a fact, that they had 6 slots there where people, and they only filled up, as you know, they just fill up all the slots. They only had 3 people, and plus Lee, only 4 people. You have a 25% chance of right there of, just by chance that you would say it was that person. But on top of that, Lee is in a torn shirt, rumpled, he's got cut, he's exhausted, he's standing there with people who don't look anything like him. In 2 of the lineups at least, I think maybe even 3 of those lineups, they used 3 office workers, with the Dallas Police Department, who were dressed in nice office clothes. Did you know that? On top of that, here's what they were demanded to do. They were supposed to stand forward and give their name and give where they work. Now, by the time Lee was arrested, everybody knew his name. It was me. Lee Harvey Oswald was all over the news, his name, and that he worked at the Texas School Book Depository. But he has to stand forth and say, my name is Lee Harvey Oswald, and I work at the Texas School Book Depository. Did you know that? And, of course, the others stood forth. They said, can you imagine, I'm Robert so-and-so, and I work for the Dallas Police Department. I'm so-and-so, and I work for the... No, they probably made up something, but I'm just saying that's the only name and the only place that was on all the news. Now, how can you miss it? So when they say they identified Oswald in the lineups, and this is just one part of it, and they also gave plenty of tips as well, to the viewers. Are you sure would you look at number 2 again? They did things like that.
So you can't count on any of the IDs that were used in the lineup because Lee Oswald had to give his name and where he worked, which was all over the news. So this is the kind of railroading that happened with Lee. This is a good man who knew if he spoke out to defend himself, others would die. What did he do? He saved the president's life. At least he told me he saved the president's life. He never went into detail. He wasn't that kind of person. He was modest about things like that.